Hey guys, this is Thomas over here at NurseMoneyTalk.com, and in this video I'm going to give just kind of like a brief overview of ER nurses and talk about what do ER nurses do, where do ER nurses work, kind of like the different types or areas where ER nurses can work, how you can become an ER nurse, and also of course looking at salary and career outlooks. Let's go ahead and start with what is an ER nurse, just to make sure we are all on the same page. An ER nurse, emergency room nurse, is a nurse that works in the emergency room department. I think that sounds kind of easy enough to kind of get a handle on. As for what do ER nurses do, the big thing you can look at what ER nurses do is pretty much, I look at it as they take the patient in, get like the initial health history, they triage, they stabilize the patient if need be. If it's something that can be treated right then and there, and then the patient is discharged to go, that happens. Many times the patient needs to be triaged, stabilized, and then they end up getting admitted into either like the med-surg, intermediate care, or the ICU, or wherever the patient needs to go in terms of getting admitted. Going to the next one, which is where do ER nurses work? The big one being like working in the emergency room department. Many times the ER nurses, they're like coming first in contact with patients. So for instance, whenever I worked in the mental health facility, we did have walk-ins that happened plenty of times, but a lot of times we were getting our patients from the ER. So the mental health patient, for instance, or the patient struggling with some kind of mental health issue or disorder, would go to the ER. ER would get the initial health history, so it could be, let's say, ex-patient made a suicidal attempt and tried to swallow X pill for X reason. These were the contributing factors that led to that. So the ER nurse would take all that history, depending on what their condition is. They would stabilize the patient at that point. If the patient was stable enough to then get transferred to a mental health facility, they would do that. If the patient was not stable enough, they would then potentially either stay at the ER till they got stable, or many times would then be admitted into the hospital, med-surg, ICU, depending on what the patient's situation is. Many times in situations where, if you look at if the hospital's like full, the patient might not have a place to go if there's no beds, and so the ER would then treat the patient accordingly right there at the ER. As for where ER nurses would work, you would potentially be looking at potentially like a trauma ER. Of course, there would be triaging, so triage area. You have a lot of ER nurses doing like flight nursing, and of course, different kind of like demographics in terms of pediatric ER, geriatric, and of course like the burn center as well is another popular spot. As for how you can become an ER nurse, like all my usual my typical recommendations, I'm going to be looking at the BSN, being a BSN RN route. You can also do ADM, but for reasons I've explained in many other videos, that's the BSN is the route that a lot of facilities and some of these even like states, that's the route that they're pushing. But of course you can accomplish the same thing with an ADN RN route. I have another video that I'll list up here that goes into how to become a registered nurse, if that is if that's something that you're interested in. And then the big thing is just to make sure that becoming an ER nurse is something that you are particularly interested in. I would definitely watch some more videos, read some more articles, make sure you educate yourself on that, because ER nursing, I mean, it's hard work in terms of the unpredictability of it, and almost similar to psych in terms of the risk of self-harm as well, in terms of all the other things that you could kind of interact in terms of gang violence, gunshot wounds, and of course like mental health patients who could be physically combative as well, since the ER is typically the ones that see that first before they get to us. I mean, we deal with that as well, when I worked in mental health, but ER gets the initial hit of it because they, many times don't have the story yet. By the time even an aggressive patient coming to us in mental health, we've already gotten the story, so we kind of already prepared on what we need to do. As for salary and career outlooks for an ER nurse, average for, you can become an ER nurse as a new grad. So of course, videos I've made on what you can expect to get paid as a new nurse will definitely apply. Sometimes you might get a little bit of kind of like a differential for just kind of like the specialty aspect of it. Not usually, from my experience, or at least not in the area where I'm at. And so kind of like the going rate for that is what you're going to get. U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics has, 75,300-ish or so is the average for a registered nurse. As for kind of career growth, nursing is expected to, keep growing as fast as the average. And so about, 9, almost 10%, at least is from 2020 to 2030 or whatever. ER is something that, it's not a department that's hard to come by. I think it is one of the, last time I heard, it's one of the criteria that hospitals have to be quote unquote a hospital, to bill like a hospital. So an ER is, getting a job, finding an ER department to potentially work for, it can be hard to get in there, especially to break in as a new nurse or an ER nurse, or to be as a nurse with no ER experience. But there are ER departments, around, but if you start getting into specialty ER, so for example, a level 1 trauma, for instance, and of course, there's only going to be a handful of those around. But that is all I have for this. If you found this video helpful, would appreciate the thumbs up. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll catch you very soon in that next one.